Devon guided his sleek, unmarked vehicle into the designated visitor parking space at Oakwood Estates, a pristine and meticulously maintained neighborhood that practically radiated exclusivity. The cul-de-sac was immaculate, lined with identical two-story homes, each adorned with manicured lawns, symmetrical hedges, and driveways occupied by polished SUVs and luxury sedans. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke from somewhere nearby. From the outside, Oakwood Estates was picture-perfect, exactly the kind of place where residents prided themselves on knowing their neighbors and keeping their community safe. But Devon had long since learned that words like safe and exclusive often carried unspoken meanings, ones that people like him were all too familiar with. He exhaled as he shifted the gear into park, running a hand over his face. It had been a grueling week at the precinct, long nights, endless paperwork, and a case that had drained the last reserves of his patience. A quiet evening at Marcus's house, catching up with an old friend over a plate of ribs and a cold beer, was exactly what he needed. As he stepped out of his car, the warmth of the pavement radiated through the soles of his sneakers. He stretched his arms above his head, rolling his shoulders to shake off the stiffness. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so, the kind of stillness that hinted at watchful eyes behind lace curtains. He barely paid attention to the subtle movement from a house across the street, the quick flicker of a curtain shifting, as if someone had just ducked out of sight. Inside that house, behind a pristine bay window, Patricia Kensington's lips pressed into a thin line. She had seen the car pull in, had noted its sleek but unremarkable design, the tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. And then she saw him, a man, alone, black. A prickle of unease crawled up her spine. She had lived in Oakwood Estates for 15 years, and she knew every resident, every guest, every car that belonged here. This one did not. Patricia prided herself on being vigilant. It wasn't nosiness, it was civic duty. She had warned the HOA for months about outsiders bringing in trouble. The increasing crime rates on the news only confirmed what she already believed. Vigilance was necessary. And now, standing in her tastefully decorated living room, she was convinced that her neighborhood was under threat. She grabbed her phone, zooming in on the license plate through the window. No HOA permit. No visitor's tag. A car sitting in the visitors section meant nothing if it didn't belong to the right kind of visitor. Her mind raced. A thief casing the area? A dealer waiting to make a drop? She had seen enough crime shows to know that criminals often disguise themselves as regular people. And this one had the audacity to park in broad daylight. Across the street, Devon knocked on Marcus's door, oblivious to the scrutiny he was under. The door swung open almost immediately, and Marcus greeted him with a broad grin. "Man, you took long enough," Marcus teased, clapping him on the shoulder. "I was about to start the grill without you." Devon chuckled as he stepped inside. Yeah, let me guess you already picked through the good ribs." Their laughter faded as the door shut behind them, sealing them inside the warmth of a home filled with the scent of sizzling meat and camaraderie. But outside, Patricia's mind was already made up. She turned away from the window, her grip tightening around her phone. The HOA board had ignored her concerns for too long. If they wouldn't take security seriously, then she would. With a practiced flick, she scrolled through her contacts and tapped a number she knew by heart. Diamond Tao and Recovery. The call connected after 2 rings. "Yeah, this is Patricia Kensington from Oakwood Estates," she said, her voice clipped and authoritative. "I need a vehicle removed immediately. It's parked in the visitor section, but it's been sitting there for a while, and it looks very suspicious." The dispatcher on the other end sounded disinterested. "What kind of vehicle?" "Black. Tinted windows. No visible permit. I don't know whose it is, and frankly, it doesn't belong here." There was a pause. "Ma'am, you said it's parked in the visitor section?" "Yes, but that doesn't mean just anyone can leave a car here," she snapped, irritation creeping into her tone. "This is a private neighborhood." She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before adding, "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was involved in something criminal. Maybe drugs. Maybe worse." That did the trick. The dispatcher's tone shifted. "All right, we'll send a truck over." Patricia hung up, satisfaction curling in her chest. Finally, someone who listened. She wasn't about to let her neighborhood turn into the kind of place where unknown cars could just appear without explanation. Grabbing her cardigan, she stepped onto her porch, standing with her arms crossed as she scanned the street. She would wait. She would make sure the job was done. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the perfect lawns and neatly arranged flower beds. Unbeknownst to her, Patricia had just made the worst mistake of her life. Patricia paced her living room, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently against her phone case. Outside, The evening sun dipped lower, bathing Oakwood Estates in warm, golden hues. The neighborhood was still, serene in the way that only carefully curated communities could be. But in Patricia's mind, there was an intruder among them. A threat. Her lips tightened as she peeked through the window blinds again. The car was still there, dark, silent, menacing. She exhaled sharply, frustration curling in her chest like a coiled spring. How long had it been now? 20 minutes? 30? Long enough to confirm that whoever owned that vehicle didn't belong here. Her gaze flickered across the street, landing on Marcus's house. The front door was shut, but she knew he was inside. He had welcomed the man in with an ease that unsettled her. As if Marcus hadn't considered the danger, as if he hadn't questioned who this person was. What he was doing here. Patricia prided herself on being different. She saw things that others overlooked. She protected this neighborhood when no one else would. And right now, she was the only one standing between Oakwood Estates and potential disaster. She took a breath and tapped the number for Diamond Tao and recovery. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? This is Patricia Kensington from Oakwood Estates," she said, injecting just the right amount of urgency into her tone. "I need a vehicle removed immediately." There was a pause. Okay. What kind of vehicle?" "Black, tinted windows, no visible permit. It's parked in the visitors section, but it's been sitting there for a while now. And frankly, it looks extremely suspicious." Another pause, this one longer. The dispatcher didn't sound particularly interested. "Ma'am, you said it's in the visitors section?" "Yes, but that doesn't mean just anyone can park here," she snapped, annoyance flaring in her voice. "This is a private neighborhood." The dispatcher sighed, and for a moment, Patricia worried he might refuse. But then she pressed forward, adding the detail that she knew would tip the scales. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was tied to something illegal," she murmured, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a grave secret. "Drugs, maybe. Or something worse." That got his attention. "All right," the dispatcher said, his tone shifting. "We'll send a truck over." Patricia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Finally, someone who listened. She ended the call and moved toward her front door, stepping onto the porch with a calculated air of authority. The humid evening air clung to her skin, but she ignored it. She was exactly where she needed to be. Across the street, the house remained quiet. There was no sign that Marcus or his visitor had any idea what was coming. Good, Patricia thought. They shouldn't. Minutes ticked by. Then, in the distance, she heard the low rumble of an approaching truck. Her pulse quickened. The headlights cut through the twilight as the tow truck rounded the corner, rolling toward the cul-de-sac with slow, deliberate purpose. The driver pulled up beside the black car, his engine idling as he assessed the situation. Patricia wasted no time. She descended the porch steps, her heels clicking against the pavement as she strode toward him. "You must be from Diamond Tao," she said briskly. "That's the vehicle." She nodded toward the car, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had done this before. The driver, a burly man in a stained jumpsuit, scratched the back of his neck. "You the property owner?" "I'm on the HOA committee," she replied, lifting her chin. "That car is unauthorized." The driver shrugged. "All right, lady. If it don't got a permit, we'll get it out of here." He moved toward the vehicle, reaching for the control levers on his truck. The chains rattled as he prepared to hook them up. Patricia crossed her arms, satisfaction curling in her chest. Any minute now, that car would be gone. Order would be restored. And she would be the one who had made it happen. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. Devon stepped onto Marcus's porch, stretching his arms as he let out a contented sigh. The evening had been exactly what he needed: good food, laughter, a break from the weight of his job. The stress of the past week had started to melt away, replaced by the simple pleasure of an old friend's company. But just as he reached into his pocket for his keys, something made him pause. The unmistakable sound of metal chains rattling. His gaze snapped toward the street. A tow truck was backing up toward his car, its powerful engine rumbling through the quiet neighborhood. Devon's easy demeanor hardened in an instant. What the hell was going on? His strides were quick, purposeful, as he moved down the driveway. The driver, a stocky man in a stained jumpsuit, barely spared him a glance, too focused on his controls. The chains were already being prepped, ready to latch onto his wheels. "Hey!" Devon's voice was sharp, cutting through the hum of the truck's motor. "What do you think you're doing?" The driver finally looked up, his brow furrowing in mild annoyance. "You the owner of this car?" "Yeah, I'm the owner. And you're about to make a big mistake." Before the driver could respond, movement from the corner of his eye caught Devon's attention. Patricia, standing a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest, chin lifted with an air of quiet satisfaction. The realization hit him like a freight train. "You can't just leave your car wherever you want," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We have rules here. This isn't that kind of neighborhood." Devin exhaled slowly, forcing down the heat rising in his chest. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before. The carefully disguised venom, the passive-aggressive way she framed her words to make it sound like she was simply upholding order. He had seen it in traffic stops, in department stores, in the thinly veiled glances of people who decided, without knowing him, that he didn't belong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open with practiced ease. The golden badge inside caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming with quiet authority. "I'm Detective Devin Carter," he said, voice level but firm. "And this," he gestured to his vehicle, "is an unmarked police car." Silence. Patricia's smug expression shattered in an instant. The color drained from her face as her mouth opened, then snapped shut, her mind scrambling for an explanation, an excuse, anything to undo what she had just set in motion. The tow truck driver cursed under his breath, immediately stepping back from the vehicle. "Damn. No one told me it was a cop's car." He threw Patricia a glare. "Lady, you should have said something." I didn't know," Patricia stammered, her bravado dissolving. "I was just following the rules." Devin's jaw tightened. He let out a slow breath, measuring his words carefully. "No, you didn't ask. You assumed. You saw me, you saw my car, and you decided that I didn't belong here." His voice was calm, but it carried a quiet weight that made Patricia shrink under his gaze. The scene had begun to draw attention. Neighbors were stepping out of their homes, murmuring amongst themselves, whispering as they took in the unfolding spectacle. "She called a tow truck on a cop," someone muttered. "She's always doing this to people," another voice chimed in. "This is ridiculous." Patricia took a shaky step back. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," she tried again, her voice weaker this time. Devin shook his head. "Safe for who?" The weight of his question hung heavy in the air. Patricia had no answer. The tow truck driver, eager to put distance between himself and the disaster unfolding, hastily shut off his controls. "Yeah, I'm not touching a cop's car," he muttered. "I'm outta here." He shot Patricia one last withering look before climbing back into his truck and pulling away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the street. Exposed. The neighbors kept watching. Devin could feel their eyes darting between him and Patricia, judgment forming in their minds. Some of them had probably seen Patricia pull stunts like this before, but tonight? Tonight she had made a mistake that she couldn't sweep under the rug. By morning, her name would be on everyone's lips. But not in the way she had hoped. Devin took one last glance at Patricia, her stiff posture, the way she avoided his gaze, and then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward Marcus's house. He had nothing left to say. Patricia, for the first time in her life, had been left speechless. By the next morning, Oakwood Estates was buzzing. Patricia Kensington's name was on everyone's lips, carried through hushed conversations over neatly trimmed hedges, and in furious messages within the HOA group chat. The news of last night's incident had spread like wildfire, the details morphing and amplifying as it passed from one household to the next. She actually called a tow truck on a cop. She didn't even ask questions first. She's been doing this for years. Remember when she harassed the delivery guy? This is the last straw. For years, Patricia had lorded over the neighborhood, wielding her self-appointed authority like a badge of honor. She had been the unofficial gatekeeper of Oakwood Estates, scrutinizing unfamiliar cars, monitoring how long guests stayed, ensuring that outsiders never overstayed their welcome. And for a long time, many had tolerated it. Some had even appreciated it, seeing her as a necessary figure to maintain standards. But this time, she had gone too far, calling a tow truck on an unmarked police vehicle, embarrassing not just herself, but the entire neighborhood, making them all look complicit in her paranoia and prejudice. And, worst of all, exposing a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The HOA board, usually slow to react, wasted no time calling an emergency meeting that evening. Patricia received the email while standing in her kitchen, her fingers gripping the edge of the marble countertop as she read the words over and over. Subject: urgent HOA meeting. Attendance required. Her stomach twisted. She had spent years lecturing others about following protocol, about maintaining order. And now, she was the one under scrutiny. That night, the community center was packed. More residents than usual had shown up, their faces expectant, some simmering with quiet anger, others simply eager to watch the spectacle unfold. Patricia sat stiffly in a cold metal chair, trying to maintain her composure. But the energy in the room was different. No one greeted her. No one offered her a reassuring nod or a polite smile. People she had once considered allies, neighbors she had spent years chatting with over wine nights and book clubs, avoided her gaze. And then, there was Devin. He didn't sit, didn't fold his arms or lean back like someone enjoying a show. He simply stood near the front, calm but unyielding, watching. The head of the HOA, a middle-aged man with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "We're here tonight to discuss the recent incident involving one of our residents and a police officer." A murmur rippled through the room. Patricia stiffened. "I was just trying to ensure the safety of our neighborhood," she started, her voice even but laced with desperation. "I followed the rules." "Did you?" A voice interjected from the back. She turned sharply. A woman she recognized, Lena, from 3 houses down. Someone who had always been neutral, if not slightly sympathetic to Patricia's concerns. "You didn't ask any questions," Lena continued, her tone hard. "You didn't even try. You just assumed." Another voice chimed in. "You did the same thing to my cousin when he visited last year. She harassed my nanny." Someone else added, and the murmurs turned into full-blown discussion, accusations piling up like bricks. Patricia's heart pounded. This wasn't just about last night anymore. They were dredging up everything. Years of complaints that had once been whispered in private, now aired out in the open. She turned toward the HOA head, looking for an ally, someone to rein her back in. But his face was impassive, his fingers laced together on the table in front of him. He wasn't going to help her. No one was. The decision came swiftly. Effective immediately, the HOA president announced, "Patricia Kensington is removed from all HOA committees. She will no longer have any authority to speak on behalf of the neighborhood." A low murmur of approval moved through the room. A few people clapped. Patricia's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Just like that, her power was gone. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Over the next few weeks, Patricia became an outcast in the very neighborhood she once ruled. The invitations stopped. People crossed the street to avoid her. Where once she had been the enforcer of unwritten rules, she was now the woman everyone whispered about, but no one acknowledged. Even the neighborhood group chat turned against her. A thread had been circulating, old stories resurfacing, tales of how Patricia had overstepped, how many people had kept quiet out of politeness. And then, the final blow. A for sale sign appeared on Patricia's lawn. Devin saw it on his next visit to Marcus's. He didn't say anything. Just took a slow sip of his beer as he leaned against the porch railing, watching as a real estate agent pulled into the driveway. Patricia had spent years acting like she owned this neighborhood. Now, she was just another name on a listing. Months passed, and the name Patricia Kensington faded from the daily conversations of Oakwood Estates. The house that had once been hers stood empty for weeks before a fresh coat of paint, and a new family erased the last remnants of her presence. Life moved on. The neighborhood continued its quiet, curated existence, and Devin barely gave her another thought. Until one fateful night. The city had settled into a restless dusk, the glow of streetlights flickering against rain-slicked roads. Devin had spent the better part of the evening wrapping up a case-long, grueling investigation that had finally led to the arrest of a major player in the city's drug trade. A win. A well-earned one. But all he wanted now was to get home, maybe pour himself a drink, and let the exhaustion settle into his bones. But as he drove through an unfamiliar stretch of town, his eyes caught something ahead. A car stalled at the side of the road, hazard lights flashing weakly against the damp darkness. He might have passed it by, had it not been for the figure standing beside it. A woman, drenched from head to toe, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Even from a distance, he could see her shoulders trembling. There was something familiar about the way she stood, the rigid posture barely masking her discomfort. Devin slowed the car, rolling down his window as he pulled up alongside. "You need some help?" The woman turned. Recognition hit him like a strike of lightning. Patricia Kensington. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her eyes widening in disbelief. Then, just as quickly, her expression shuddered, the remnants of pride still clinging to her, despite the undeniable humiliation of her situation. She cleared her throat, forcing composure into her voice. "My car broke down. I called roadside assistance, but..." She hesitated, glancing down the empty road. "They said it might take a while." Devin's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. The irony of it all hung thick in the air between them. Patricia Kensington, once the self-proclaimed protector of Oakwood Estates, the woman who had wielded her influence like a weapon, now stranded, vulnerable, waiting on someone else's mercy. For a long beat, he said nothing. Let her sit in it. Let her feel what it was like to be at the mercy of another's judgment. Then, finally, he reached for his radio. "I'll call a tow truck for you." Patricia blinked, her face tightening. "You're leaving?" Devin's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. Don't worry, Patricia, help is on the way. And with that, he rolled up his window, put his car into drive, and pulled away, watching in his rearview mirror as Patricia shrank into the distance. She had spent years deciding who did and didn't belong. Now, she knew what it felt like to be on the other side of that decision. And Devon? He had better things to do than waste another second on Patricia Kensington.